Hey all, it's Josh. This is my top 10 games that I played in 2021. At the start of the year, I made a commitment to play more games, and I'm pretty happy that I ended up playing 71 games this year. Yeah, so I've picked 10 games that I played for the first time this year. They weren't necessarily released this year. They're the sort of games that have stuck with me, that I kept thinking about after I played them, and here's the list. In number 10, it's Paradise Killer by Kaizen Gameworks. This is a really strange, neon-drenched detective-ish game set in a world of a really interesting ontology. It's just jam-packed full of ideas and themes and interesting characters and Phoenix Wright-like deductive mystery things, all wrapped in this really cohesive and singular sort of aggressive art style that I just found really memorable and definitely gave me a lot to think about afterwards. It's certainly not a perfect game. There are definitely moments where it was more frustrating than interesting, but overall I think that like the time that I spent inhabiting and running around this strange island was well worth it. Number 9 is Slipways by Beetlewing. Slipways is a 4X game, except they removed like 2.5 of the X's. There's no combat, there's very little traditional conflict, and it's fully single player. It's a 45, 50 minute 4X strategy game where you're given a random galaxy, and there are different ways to customize to your playstyle based on... They did a really good job at cutting out the chaff and just condensing what makes a sort of larger scale 4X game so compelling and interesting. And it has that kind of one more turn type vibe, but one more run. You'll finish a run and you'll think, every time you finish a run, you feel like you've learned something new that you want to try out next time, or a different strategy or tactic. And the way you kind of tactilely connect the planets and stations and meteors together, it's very satisfying. And it's the first time I played a run-based strategy game like this, and I found that it scratched an itch that it was just kind of hard for me this year to kind of get invested in playing a campaign that I know is going to take like 40 hours to complete. Whereas Slipways, you can boot it and be in-game and you can finish a run within the hour. It's episodic, almost. So yeah, if you're interested in strategy games, but maybe, like me, you've been struggling to commit large amounts of time to those sorts of games, this is a good sort of lower-level solution, I think. Number 8 is Road 96 by Digix Art. So this is also a run-based narrative game. When I first saw the trailers, I was kind of intrigued. I felt like... I don't know, I just feel like when you do something like this, it usually ends up kind of messy, like non-linear vignettes glued together by like an overarching setting, run-based with like character death or escape. It feels like it's going to be like all of the messiness of prop gen with all of the annoyances of creating a sort of singular, high-polished 3D experience. But I was actually pleasantly surprised. I found the stories and the characters kind of moving. It's not a perfect game. There's a limit on the amount of complexity that they can offer based on the scale of the project and the size of the team and development time and stuff, but it promised me that I was going to get a series of vignettes glued together in a non-linear fashion that would allow me to tell the stories of these teenagers trying to escape this land in this sort of extremely topical, hard border state, and it really delivered on that. And there are especially a few relationships in there which are explicitly moving. I would say the game doesn't end as strongly as it begins, but the way it delivers the vignettes that build on each other, it really does feel like you're learning more about these characters and you're growing alongside them, even though it's explicitly different teenagers that you're helping pilot through this sort of strange set of roads and intertwining stories and vignettes in this sort of hellish state. Number 7 is Life is Strange True Colors by Deck 9. So I don't really like the Life is Strange series. Like, I tried to play the first game when it released and kind of bounced. I thought the dialogue was kind of like hacky and the gameplay didn't really stick with me. So I didn't bother. So I kind of bounced off Life is Strange 1 and I didn't bother playing Life is Strange 2 or any of the spin-offs or anything. So anyway, after playing Road 96, I was kind of really interested, and especially hearing a few people talk about it on podcast stuff, I was kind of interested in True Colors. Like, the concept was intriguing and I thought, what's the worst that can happen? I don't like it again, and I just reconfirmed that I'm not a fan of this series. But I was more than pleasantly surprised. I went in with dead low expectations, not sure what to expect, and I came out of it like pleasantly surprised. I was moved. I thought it was funny. I thought the characters were interesting. I thought the story and the twists and turns were really compelling. Once again, it's not a perfectly told story, but it certainly passes what I call the Netflix test, which is like if the story of a game was a random, crappy, straight-to-stream movie you found on Netflix, would it be a good story? The answer for a lot of games is probably not. The interactivity carries a lot of it, but for this game, I think it passed that with flying colours. And I thought it was just a really interesting examination of what it means to be like a young woman of colour, especially in this kind of area. I think they could have probably pressed on that more, but the fact that they touched on it at all was kind of bold, especially for this sort of AAA polish narrative game of this style, and especially following on from Life is Strange 2. I just found it really moving. You know, I cried at multiple points in the story, and just spending time in that place with those characters was just a delightful distraction during a year with a lot of low points. Number 6 is The Forgotten City by Modern Storyteller. So I had no idea about this game until it launched. Like, I hadn't seen any press, I hadn't heard anything about it. So basically, long story short, is it started as a Skyrim mod, and they converted it into sort of its own standalone thing with more content and polish and improvements. And once again, I installed it. I went in with pretty low expectations. Wasn't sure what to expect. I'm a huge fan of games that implement like time loop-ish mechanics. I'm not a big history person. I'm not like super into like my ancient civilizations and stuff, but I found the setting really interesting, the characters compelling, the way all of the elements moved around in the simulation, and these sort of puzzles which could be solved through multiple routes to be sort of really compelling and interesting. And more than anything, I feel like it told a self-contained, interesting story with a lot of surprises that I obviously won't spoil. It wrapped it all up and it just ended it perfectly. Like, I was maybe, some might describe it as cheesy, but I found it deeply, deeply satisfying. And I was thinking a lot about the setting and the world and the characters and the story for a long time after I finished playing it. Number 5 is Suzerain by Torpor Games. So Suzerain is a really interesting game that is one of the few games that I've played that manages to successfully fuse the concept of like a sort of at-scale state political simulator with a choice-based text narrative game. There are a lot of games that do one or the other quite well, but in Suzerain, you really do feel like you're living out a story of a character whilst also shaping the political machinations of this sort of vaguely Eastern European nation-state. I found the approach the game took to politics was broadly fair, informed, and interesting in a way that doesn't just lean into like typical like centrist or moderate like Western viewpoints. I thought that the range of outcomes was very satisfying. I played this way back at the start of the year, and I've replayed multiple times since then to see what different outcomes you could get. And the way it simulates political machination whilst combining it with narrative highlighted by specific characters representing factions, I think is just like a fascinating approach to this style of play, which really puts names and faces to ideologies and ideas, especially in a land that isn't your own. And I think more than anything, the game achieves a sense of full story of a person's life and their family and the place that they live, without leaning into like oblique stereotypes or taking easy outs. It'd be very easy for a developer to project their own ideology or a correct solution onto this type of game, but you'll quickly find that your own personal beliefs might be out of line with the beliefs of the people you've been elected to represent. And it was just surprising and delightful and shocking and sad when you're playing a game that actually captures that kind of feeling. Number 4 is the New York Times Crossword by the New York Times. So earlier this year, I started watching Chris Remo's video series called The Daily Solve, which is on YouTube, where he solves the New York Times crossword. I've been an on-again, off-again crossword person for a long time. A few years ago, I got really into solving the free puzzles that were available on the New York Times app. So I would just go through and complete all of the puzzles that were available for free and just like exhaust all of those options one by one. After following the video series for a couple weeks, I decided to resubscribe and try my own hand at it, and it's become part of a ritual or a routine for me. It's been a long time since I've had a game like that, a game which compels you to check in each day to do a little challenge or a little puzzle. And yeah, if obviously you have to, it's a crossword, like it's not exactly innovative or new or novel, but I found it really satisfying sitting down each day, an escalating series of challenges through the week, solving as part of a wider community, like watching these videos and chatting with people on Discord, and generally improving my ability to solve these things, my ability to retain trivia or to think the way the setters think. And this has definitely been part of me more widely appreciating like non-video games / puzzles. So it's been fun and interesting, and I've got my daily streak going, and probably one of my highlights of this year was I was at the Develop conference with some friends, and we were at a party bar in the garden area, and I realized I had like 40 minutes to solve like the hard puzzle, and so we were just sat there like going through clues, yelling out answers and stuff, and it became like solving a crossword puzzle as a communal experience in like a sort of strange social event. But yeah, it's been, I don't know if I'll keep it up like long term, but it's definitely become a habit, at least for now, and yeah, I'm excited to get even better at plugging in these random words into a grid. Number 3 is Disco Elysium: The Final Cut by Zaum. So I first played Disco Elysium shortly after launch, and it quickly became one of my favorite games of all time, possibly my favorite game of all time, up there with games like Outer Wilds, which I also love. So I was meaning to replay Disco, and sort of around the time that urge peaked, Final Cut dropped, and once again I went in with pretty managed expectations. I wasn't expecting it to be too transformative, but yeah, I actually came out of it maybe liking it even more than I did the first time. The additional content they've added definitely builds out the world a lot more, fully up to the standards of the original, and it being fully voice acted changed the way I played it a little bit, where I felt like more I could sit back and listen to these sort of incredible performances that were adding to the already brilliant text. And so by the end of it, I felt just like I felt the first time I played through it, but perhaps even more so. It's a stunning game. It's one of the best games ever made, in my opinion. And I think if you're interested at all in narrative games, this is fully time to install and play. You don't even have to read if you don't want to. You can just lean back and listen. Yeah. Number 2 is Hitman 3 by IO Interactive. So this is the final in the trilogy of the World of Assassination, or whatever the branding is these days. I think more important than anything else, it's sort of the culmination of years of work following from Hitman 1 in 2016 to now, in which IO sort of took everything that was great about the series, cut everything that wasn't working, and added a whole bunch of new stuff, which really modernized the series. Hitman 3 brings along 5 new amazing levels to explore with interesting characters. I'm not super high on the narrative of the story, but it definitely brings that to a conclusion. And more importantly, it just adds more sandboxes, more tools, more locations, more interesting insights, more live service game aspects. And a really interesting thing that IO have done is, because all 3 games in this trilogy are built on the same engine, if you own 1 and 2, you can play all of those levels in free with all of the engine improvements and the tools you've unlocked and stuff like that. So, for my money now, if you pick up 1 and 2 and you pick up 3, you can play, 15 plus levels, plus variants, plus escalation missions with all of these incredible tools. And Hitman's one of the longest gaming franchises I've been a fan of, and I really do think that some of these levels are the best in the franchise. And yeah, I think with Hitman 3, they've really sort of peaked and culminated, and I'm really excited to see what they do next. I think, they're exploring other projects, but I really think that I'm really excited for what like a sort of new generational leap might look like for the series. And at the end of the day, it's just fun to be like a pasty, bold white man who can blend in to literally any country on the planet for some reason, and who can hock a screwdriver so hard and fast that it will kill someone from 50 feet away. It's a comedy game wrapped in serious social stealth, and if any of this interests you, I consider it a must-play. And number 1 is Blaseball by the Game Band. Blaseball was my sort of go-to 2020, and if I'm being honest with myself, in 2021, A lot of my most memorable gaming moments are once again Blaseball related. The beloved and brilliant and undefeatable Baltimore Crabs returned from the black hole they were relegated to immediately sweep the league and win a championship. The so-called expansion era came to an end with a sort of satisfying narrative conclusion. So many strange and interesting mechanics were explored. And beyond that, I think the team themselves figured out a more healthy pattern of working that allowed them to update the game without necessarily burning out. And with other developments like investment, the future for Blaseball as kind of like a live, quote-unquote, live service game seems really bright and exciting. And I don't know, in the past 2 years, there's nothing that has been a more interesting development in the world of games to me than sitting down with a bunch of like random people cheering on a fictional sport team that we all essentially arbitrarily selected in this sort of strange virtual world of horror and glory and American sports terminology that you have to learn. It's a brilliant game, and I'm super excited for what the next proper era looks like. Maybe it'll be GOTY 2022 too. I don't know. We'll find out. So that was my top 10 games. Obviously, there were a lot of games that I played that I thought were interesting and valuable that couldn't quite make it onto this list. And overall, yeah, I'm in terms of purely in terms of video games, I'm pretty optimistic and hopeful for 2022. There's a lot I'm looking forward to, and yeah, I'm excited to play even more, get through more of my backlog, and compose a list of 10 games in a year that are half games from the previous 3 years. Thanks for watching. Happy holidays. If you're taking time off, I hope you have a good time. Bye.